engagement. We do this through my department, but we also work closely with businesses, whether it's in the state, nationally, internationally, to focus on helping businesses improve their employment outcomes and strategies and management and retention of individuals with disabilities, along with all the policy and the research. So we fully believe it is to encompass all pieces so that we can improve employment outcomes for individuals with disabilities.
Thank you so much, Stacy. And I wanted to take a moment to thank our sponsor of this webinar and of MCCI Limbach. They have been a wonderful partner with us over the last 6 months or so, in which our partnership has been formal. So thank you so much for Rebecca and all the Limbach folks that I think are listening in now for that. So you might be wondering, how much, why we're talking about neurodiversity in the construction industry and in the built environment. And personally, I have ADHD. Both of my daughters have ADHD, and I actually have many relatives and friends that are neurodiverse in many, many different ways, and was just personally interested in the notion of neurodiversity in the built environment, and did a little digging on the internet and found that there isn't a whole lot written about neurodiversity. In fact, I think a lot of neurodiverse adults don't even realize that they are neurodiverse, and Stacy will probably talk a little bit about the definition of neurodiversity for those of you that might not be familiar with the term. But apparently there was a study done in the UK in which 1 in 4 workers in the UK, which I would imagine is very similar here in the United States, are self-identify as neurodiverse. Stacy, if you wouldn't mind giving us, explain the concept of neurodiversity and its relevance in the workplace so we can level set before this conversation we're about to have.
Yeah, sounds great. Just by using your emojis or thumbs up, you guys let me know if you've heard the term neurodiversity prior to this panel? I see a few thumbs up. Awesome. Only 3. So, oh, here's a few more. Great. So for those of you who are not familiar with the term, so at Kennedy Krieger Institute, we looked at this definition about 7 years ago. And we wanted it to, when we saw it, it's about broad and make sure this definition is broad. So neurodiversity is defined as neurological differences of the brain. So at its most basic form, neuro is brain, diversity is differences. But it's a broad range of neurological differences that endow an individual with unique skills and talents. And those talents are valued and respected. And they are respected at home, in the workplace, and in the community. And what we've learned over the years is when people hear the term neurodiversity, we think about ADHD, ADD, we think about autism, but it is so much more broader than that. It can even go as broad when we think about mental health and those needs and challenges that our employees and our colleagues need throughout the day. So we want to think about this broadly in this conversation, but also understanding that each and every one of us is different. We all have differences of our brain. We all do things differently. In the workplace, specifically when we're thinking about the workplace, we all have our own strategies and supports to be successful at work. And how do we help ourselves move through our tasks and what we're being asked to do? There are also people that need that support. And through this conversation, at least from my perspective, I'm going to be able to talk about the differences of those who need limited support to those who need a lot more support in the workplace. Just to give you a very staggering statistic, 80% of individuals who identify as having a disability between the ages of 16 and 64, so pretty much working age, are not part of the workforce. 80%. That is compared to their counterparts of people who do not identify as having a disability, that only 37% are currently not in the workforce. I'm going to give you even a stronger perspective on this. That 80% has moved the needle less than 5% in over 20 years. We are in a workforce where we need talent. We need people who are committed and dedicated to work. What we need to do better now is when it comes to supporting and managing and retaining those employees who need additional support. 1 in 4 adults in the States identify as having a disability. That's any disability. So by the definition of the CDC, it is an impairment to all different areas like vision, mobility. It can be our hearing, any impairment that affects our day to day. That's the simplest form of the CDC definition. That is 66 million people here in the United States who identify as a disability that could be visible or not visible. So we are amongst people every single day who identify as having a disability, and often many who probably don't identify as having a disability. But if you think about that definition at its simplest form, every single one of us at some point in our lives will have a disability because we age and things change and things are more difficult for us to do. So hope that's the level set of getting us in the framework of how are we going to focus on inclusion. This specifically is on the construction industry, but it takes all of us to think about different needs to make our workplaces more inclusive so all people can have access to employment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So a follow-up question for you on that, on the challenges. What are some common challenges, speaking specifically to neurodiversity? What are some common challenges neurodiverse employees face in the construction industry, and how can employers address these challenges?
So one of the biggest barriers when it comes to employment with the construction industry or any industry for a person with disabilities is their ability to meet industry standards when it comes to this testing for skills. So oftentimes there are specific skills or exams that are required. That is something that is challenging for individuals with disabilities to meet those standards, to complete those competencies. In addition to the interview process, interviews can be extremely challenging when it comes to answering those who, what, when, where, why questions, or tell me about a time, those behavioral questions that we all love so much in interviews. Being able to show your ability to do the skill is a lot more supportive than being able to answer those questions. There are also individuals with disabilities are often held to those social norms of making sure there's eye contact, the way they engage with colleagues and peers, where our focus should be their skill set and how do we help our workforce understand that everyone is different. Another huge area is experience. You're oftentimes a person who has more significant disabilities. They don't have the experience that people are looking for. There's a long list that I can go on, but I think those are the top 4, in addition to transportation and being able to get to the work site for those who are unable to drive.
Thank you. So what would be some best practices for creating that inclusive environment to help overcome those challenges?
Yeah, so I already mentioned when it comes to the interview process, you want to look at the individual's skills, not how are they answering the questions? Are they answering the questions exactly how you wanted it? Are they thinking differently than you thought about the answer to that question? Because something we need to remember about those individuals who identify as being neurodiverse is that they have a very unique way of seeing things, understanding things, and providing information. We need to be open to differences within how we complete the tasks and get those tasks done. So ensuring that we're focusing on the skill, being open to someone having job coaches on site, or having executive functioning coaches on site to be able to provide those accommodations and support. Providing accommodations for the testing. There are always ways that people can get support and accommodations when it comes to someone reading to them or extended time. So we want to keep that in mind. Providing opportunities for transportation, so providing people vouchers for transportation, providing funding for Ubers and Lyft, any type of public transportation. But one of the main things that I do think that will help companies when it comes to breaking down these barriers is training to managers on how to support, provide feedback, encourage, and modify anything within the workday that supports an individual with a disability to be able to be successful at work, and create cultural champions so that your organization embraces the differences so that everyone can be successful at work.
Speaking of testing, I know in school, if a student has a 504 or an IEP, it follows them. I believe that when it comes to apprenticeship testing, it may, but I could be completely wrong. Do you have any idea?
So when it comes to apprenticeship testing, there is a submission that you can put in actually for any type of skill test that requires all of these competency-based tests, certification, credentials have a way that you can submit for accommodations. There are different ways to do that. When you transition into adult services, so you have an IEP or a 504, if you are eligible for adult services, is a person-centered plan, and you also have an employment plan when it comes to services through Division of Rehabilitation Services. They also have supports and services for these testing. So there are definitely opportunities. However, we're not always aware of them, and then they're not being implemented. So knowing about it, learning about it, and being able to offer it to employees is super important. Knowing the resources available is going to bring you more talent to your company.
Right, because not even a one size fits all for the two people with ADHD or autism or whatever. If you met one person with it, you've met one person with it. You haven't met all people with that disability. Correct. All right. So Jen, you don't mind my outing you. You're on our panel as a fellow ADHD neurodiverse person. So I was wondering if you could share some of your personal experiences working with ADHD in our industry.
Yeah, and I realized I didn't even say I'm neurodivergent when I introduced myself, because I am only been a year since I received my diagnosis. So it's still something that I don't always think about when I introduce myself. And but learning that I have ADHD has been something that has really allowed me to find ways to support the way that I think. And as a civil engineer, the first 10 years of my career, I was very much, problem solving, doing all the things that I'm really good at, which is like seeing the big picture and like figuring out how we can get it done, learning the process. Yeah, and I'm very detail oriented. So I have a lot of skills that help me in that area. And so I think it's just like from experience, I can see it now that all of those things really helped me become a really good engineer. Where I struggled was became a project manager a few years before I became a mom. And I think motherhood is where I struggled. And so it was that added layer of taking care of other humans our industry is shifting to be more flexible, but 14 years ago when I became a mom, that is not how it was, and you were just hoping that you could get the most flexibility that you could, but that was really like coming in 30 minutes late or leaving 30 minutes early. There wasn't a lot of remote work options or how to kind of work that out. I really did overcome that as a mom too, kind of figuring out how to be a project manager and manage all of the things. But then 3 years ago, my husband had a major health incident, and losing his support, it really from like just making our household function and driving and all of those things really, I think, is kind of where I experienced some caregiver burnout. And then that is what really led me to look like what's going on, because I was just like really struggling with focus and just, I'm really good at solving engineering problems because that's what I grew up and knew how to do. But trying to do it was really the work-life balance that was the biggest struggle for me. And so I did take a year off of work and came back to the industry this past February, very intentionally looking for a job that was going to provide me the flexibility that I needed. And I feel like I'm thriving almost. It's been like a very good fit from the standpoint of I'm I'm a hybrid leader, I'm managing a hybrid team, and that can be really challenging, but I know how to get a lot. I'm really experienced. I feel like I'm a subject matter expert in construction documents, basically. And because of that, I have a lot of lived experience that one thing I feel like maybe about with people with ADHD too is they're very vulnerable to share their experiences. And that includes, all of the, PTSD you can have from pipe conflicts in the field, or you're sitting there looking at a trench with a contractor and you're like, but also I'm a really visual learner, and that's something I learned pretty early, but I've realized that that's also really effective for mentoring and developing neurotypical engineers as well. So I have a different style, and it took me a long time to kind of embrace that was a strength, because like kind of Stacy said, there's definitely some executive functioning challenges that I have, and I spent too much time, a little advice I guess, is too much time focused on my weaknesses and less on what my strengths were. And you can neutralize your weaknesses, right, if you put in the right structure. But one year I think I read 39 books about productivity, and none of them really stuck. And in the last year, I've really been able to kind of find things that are helping me on the executive functioning side, as well as managing my projects and my team. So I think I didn't love that I was a very multi-passionate person for a long time in my life as well. And I can see how much benefit it is to my industry right now, and my firm, and my team. And it's really kind of lit up a fire that in my passion that I have right now is like, we need more women in this industry. And I see a place for people that are neurodivergent, especially in construction or surveying, and like these like outdoor and like very visual roles. So yeah, so like, I mean, I didn't know that all the time. Like there's definitely like struggling, and I have a really high expectation for myself, sometimes maybe too high. But that has allowed me to really focus on like, how can I do this more efficiently, more like, and kind of like not just for me, for everyone. So I'm really good at getting everyone like on the same, like casting a vision, whether it's a project or I don't know, something at my house, but like, and getting people on board. And so I've kind of just leaned into that. And if you're somebody who is a good team player, like on a sports team, or you love being outdoors, like the construction and the AEC industry really has a lot of opportunities in some, and it's like, I could have used some of those accommodations, Stacy, that you talked about, especially I took my PE twice, and so it's like, but it was like having to go through the first time and kind of through that lived experience. It's like, I remember all my lived experience. I don't remember the details of every little thing, but I know how to find it, And so it's some of those things. It was interesting to hear you say about the interviewing, because it's true. It's like having to recall things is a challenge. It's not that I don't know it. It's just that I'm going to think about it when I'm driving home. You know what I mean? And not on the spot. And that is something I've accepted about myself now. And that feels, it does give you some of your confidence back, because I've gone through certain scenarios where it's like, if I wasn't prepared enough with the answers ahead of time, you just kind of feel stuck. And so, but in this industry, it's also good not to say things that you don't know either. So you're just like, I'll get back to you. So that's a really good piece of advice. But I feel like I kind of went all over the place, but if
no problem.
Okay.
I know we've talked before about this, kind of relate with absolutely everything that you've said. And I will, as I think most people are their harshest critics,
Yeah.
but focusing really I feel like my career has taken off when I've realized what I was good at and focused on that, right? And stopped beating myself up about my shortcomings
Mm-hmm.
and supplemented it with, and I'm lucky now that I'm leading an organization that I'd be like, I don't really like accounting, so I'm hire an accountant, right? And I can't manage my inbox, so I have an assistant, right? Those types of things that just so I can optimize at my best. But I completely relate to everything that you've said.
And
So
can I add
Yeah.
that it's also about your supervisor and your leaders, and they can make all the difference when it comes to those supports that you need in the workplace and also understanding what you need. When you're a manager, you want to support and manage each employee differently based on what they need. We don't support anyone the same way because everyone has different needs and support. So I think it also comes down to that manager. And what we have seen in our industry in providing supports is when that manager changes, it really impacts the employee and sometimes creates more barriers and challenges within the workplace because their supervisor manager had all the supports and strategies in place. So it's important that other leaders in the organization also do best practices and similar strategies.
wonderful.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say, I have had a very intentional career, but I've changed jobs a decent amount. And I think, for a while, I was probably a little ashamed of that, but when I really look back, every time I got to a point where I wasn't going to grow anymore at that organization, or like you said, I didn't know that I needed specific accommodations. And then I've just been very good at knowing like when it was time to move on, right? But it was always looking like getting narrow and narrower to like where is it that I'm going to be successful. And one thing I'll say about engineering and construction architecture is there's a lot of structure built into this industry because it has to be. That's how we do it. And sometimes it's really frustrating, but what I've learned in the last year is that I actually thrive in this environment. Like but with the flexibility of getting the work done, not I work very hard. Like I definitely work a hard 40 hours, right? But it's like I need the flexibility to go take my husband to appointment or pick up my daughter from basketball, and then I can get back on. And that was something that was really hard to advocate for 10 years ago. I feel like it's a little easier now, but I still have so many friends that struggle with asking for accommodations. Because we're really still not, there's a lot of companies still really focused on butts and seats and not what are the outcomes that we need to get done. And so I think that's one great thing about our industry. It does tend to be more outcomes focused because we are delivering a product, whether that's a building or construction documents or planning documents, whatever. So yeah.
100%. Having a job that required me to be in my seat by 8:30 in the morning. 8:30, it's not incredibly hard, but
Yeah.
just the fact that there was a time that I had to be there was hard. Give me some flexibility and I'll stay till 10 o'clock at night if I have to get it done, right? But I completely agree that flexibility. I do think starting in my career almost 25 years ago versus today, most companies have that flexibility, but there are still some more conservative firms out there that might not have that. So allowing for that, I think is incredibly important. So we've talked a lot about the strategies and accommodations. Before we move on to Rebecca, do you have any advice for any other neurodivergent individuals considering a career in construction?
Yeah, I mean, I think my biggest advice is if you're questioning, like, do some research. Like, if you're really struggling with something, like, do some research, ask your doctor. Like, it was something that I didn't actually even really identify as until a friend brought it up. And then I started like just reading more about it. And like, if you can really feel like you identify with some of those traits, even if you don't identify with all of them, right? Or like, it's still, I just look into it, because it can, even just reading some things can give you a different strategy than, like I said, I read a lot of neurotypical productivity books and they just didn't work for me. And so then it was like continuing this cycle of like, well, why can't I figure this out? Right? It should be easier than this, where I can, like I always tell my husband this, I'm like, I can design and permit in COVID a $750 million project, and I struggle to like be on time or pay my bills on time. You know what I mean? And so it's like, what things do I need in place to make those things easier? And it just makes everything easier. So it's really, my advice is like, if you are really struggling with something, ask for help. I've learned that the hard way. I'm like the oldest of five. I'm very hyper independent. And then this has really been an eye-opening experience with, burnout, and then my diagnosis, and then kind of figuring out what structure I needed around me. And, I'm in a role that's more senior than any role I've been in now. And I feel like I'm thriving more than I ever have in my career, right? And so don't hesitate to ask for the accommodations. And if you can't go directly to your supervisor, ask someone else. They may have a different approach that you haven't thought of. I think that's my best advice. I mean, I think it's hard to say accept yourself as who you are if you don't know that you have ADHD, because it's like it's always felt like this hard thing for me, because I have been different and people have said I was different. First, I was a woman, and then second, I was more social. I loved BD, different things. And I think maybe I like put myself down a little, like I wasn't always in the weeds with the details of the design, but I knew how to get it done. Right. And so it's just like different things. We all have strengths. And I think what you said, Stacey, one thing too is like, we need so many different people on a team to get things done. We don't want all high achievers on a team, right? Because it's like, doesn't really work fun. It's not fun, but it's like, how are we helping each other so that we can open opportunities for all of us? And I see that that's something I do naturally well. It's just now that I can see that it's a strength and not just something that makes me different.
I love that. Back when I used to work for Barton Mallow, we read a book by Sean Acor called Big Potential.
That's so funny. I'm reading it right now.
What you said is you don't want the top of the class, like your entire team to
Yeah.
fill the person that graduated from the top of the class. And then that's not saying that you don't want smart, you just want diversity of thought on your
Yeah.
team, and pulling people with different backgrounds and everything is what you need to do. And it was kind of eye-opening because our whole lives were taught that's who you want, right? You want the best person.
Yeah.
Sometimes the best person isn't the person that tested high. And I'm like, I was a high achiever in college, right? Through my bouts of procrastination and everything like that. Still, I had good grades, right? And I was on a scholarship and everything, but that doesn't mean that every person with ADHD or anything has those same types of skills.
Yeah. And I would say, as a leader now, one thing that I've thought about as somebody who knows now that I'm neurodivergent is like, you have to really consider the whole person. And I think that's like what is potentially going on outside of work that could be impacting what they may need, or they may need a little bit additional assistance at specific times in their career, or transition points. I think transition points is the place to really focus on, because those have been the hardest points for me. Is it's the transition until things kind of normal off. It's the uncertainty, right? We all hate uncertainty, but yeah, I think it's really leaning into the fact that we all think different, and that is a really good thing, because and then allowing people the opportunity, like that's the belonging piece and the DEI and B stuff, is like, so that they feel open to say something that's different or bring up something, without the fear of, getting yelled at or saying that their idea is dumb or something, and I've seen that in our industry too. So it's, yeah. So I think it's really like thinking through, how are we including everybody's ideas? But then it's like, when you're really seeing somebody struggle, how are we thinking about do they need it differently? So like here's an example. For me, I'd much rather prefer someone to delegate a task to me on a call. I'm a verbal processor. I like hearing things. Whereas if you send me just an email, like do all these things, it's going to be really hard for me to start. Like, you know what I mean? And so I know that about myself now, so I can work through that. But before I knew that, I'm like, why is this so hard? Right? Like if the person sitting next to me can do this, why is this so hard for me? And so I've really kind of taken that as a leader and really thought about how is my team learning, even how are my daughters receiving, information from me, or if it's not connecting, why not? Because it's very rarely that if somebody's in this industry, they want to be. And so it's just a matter of figuring out how they learn best, so that they can be successful.
Thank you on that very much for your thoughts on that. So Rebecca, we're gonna you're here to help us figure out how companies can actually implement these accommodations and make sure that you have a culture of inclusion. So what specific HR policies does Limbach have or can be implemented to better support all employees, but specifically neurodiverse employees in the construction industry?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that's a great question. I do think it's a tough question, though, Jennifer, because it's really broad and it really depends on things like the geography that the company is located in, what that political climate is like, the resources that are available to them, the type of work that they do, state and federal regulations. We keep talking about accommodations, but when it comes to individuals with disabilities, there's a lot of legalities that go into that as well. But what I can do, like you mentioned, is I can talk about what we do here at Limba. I should add that some of these interventions are role dependent, right? Because it is very, very difficult to be a skilled laborer and work from home. But so one of the things that we do really, really well here is we have flexible work practices. The pandemic taught us that folks can be productive in a variety of settings, and some are even more productive when they're able to provide input on the physical work environment they want to work in. So really, depending on the role, we offer office hoteling. So we have an open concept space, and we recognize that doesn't work for everybody. In particular, it can be really challenging for individuals who are neurodivergent. So when we moved into these open concept spaces, we offered everybody noise canceling headphones. We didn't say just because you have a diagnosis, you're the only one that's going to get the headphone. We offer that to everybody to make sure that people feel included. We also let folks choose where they want to sit on any given day. Depending on the tasks, folks may want to sit in a cube one day, or they may want to sit in an office with a closed door the next day. Like that option is available to them on a regular basis. Yeah. We have flexible workspaces. So we have team members who may want to work from coffee shops. Maybe they want to work from home. Maybe some people just prefer to take meetings walking outside. That's all okay. And it's acceptable here because for us, it's more about the outcome, like the skills that you have and how you're lending yourself and your talent to the business. We have flexible schedules. So we do have core business hours, like our customers expect us to be readily available during a schedule, but there's always flexibility on when that day starts and ends. And of course, we have flexible PTO schedules for our salaried employees. And then we have flexible summer hours, really to help support our team members if they want to spend time with their families or if they have things in their personal lives that they have to tend to. I think the other really great thing that we do is our training and development practices. So we support people in all ways of learning through our award-winning talent and development team. So when we put presentations out to the business, it's a requirement that they include visual aids and written communication because people learn differently, right? So you want to support the visual learner, the read-write learner. We also talk to our presentation. So we support the auditory learner. We include things like group discussions for those who are logical, analytical, or those who want to learn with a group. We include hands-on activities for those kinesthetic learners. And the great thing about all these interventions is our employees don't even have to ask. Like they are included in the way that we do business because what we're trying to do here is really eliminate the stigma when it comes to neurodiversity.
I absolutely love all of that. And it's obvious that you guys are a leader, and we definitely need to get you on a podcast talking about how companies can bring those types of HR policies and practices and learning development to theirs, because as we know, a lot of construction firms are small. That you're lucky if there's even an HR person that's their only job. They may also be, the account manager or office manager or anything like that. So no, I absolutely love that, and would love to talk to you at another time about how we can help the rest of the industry with that. Speaking of, we talked earlier about training managers, right? And we talked about how to make sure managers are aware. What do you guys do to make sure that your managers are trained and colleagues to be more aware and supportive of their neurodivergent employees?
Yeah, of course. So, it's interesting that you bring this question up. I was listening in on a DEI webinar recently where the facilitator actually reviewed a study that was done within Fortune 500 companies. And what they shared was that within these Fortune 500 companies, about 90% of the respondents said that they hire people with physical disabilities, like no question. However, only 20% of the respondents hired people with mental disorders or folks who identified as neurodivergent. And we spent a great deal of time during that webinar really talking about how that comes from a general lack of understanding and awareness about what it means to be neurodivergent, but also the benefits to the business. Because again, there's a little bit of stigma and a little bit of fear from leaders about how to manage individuals who identify a certain way. So when I look at what employers can do, I really look at what a company can do at large, because it's really not an HR function. It's not a manager's function. It really starts with creating a culture that values and prioritizes different perspectives. So that's created by hiring the right people for the roles. You, Jen, Stacey, you both talked a lot about recruiting. And I'd love to give some insight on how we do that, but that's where it starts, right? Because you're hiring people who foster an environment where everybody feels safe and respected. And here at Limbaugh specifically, like that's pretty clear through our We Care culture. And you hear us talking about our committed people, like that's a differentiator for us in the market, because we intentionally want to make sure that we have a diverse work environment. And once you have that foundation and commitment from your team members, that's really when like tangible interventions can come into place. So we need to equip our leaders with the tools they need to support diverse talent. So that could be training on communication styles, active listening, and communicating through different channels. Not everybody takes information in well when it's said to them. How do you follow up in an email, and how are you clear and concise so that the receiver takes in that information? It could also be training on how to coach and mentor team members, because not everybody learns the same way. And because of our We Care culture, Limbaugh has really built an organization that provides partners to our business leaders so that they not only can become knowledgeable about neurodiversity and other different types of physical and mental disorders, but they can be more active in the workplace as well. So we have people and culture business partners like myself who help coach leaders and are really involved when there are workplace issues or accommodation issues, or just when a workplace issue arises. We have a people and culture operations team who really facilitates the benefits and administration portion of accommodations. They are well-versed in laws and resources that are not only available through the company, but that, are required by employers. And then again, we have an incredible award-winning talent development team that engages with leaders to help them kind of flex their leadership style to meet the needs of the employee, which I think, Jen, you had touched on as well. So really, that's what we do to make sure that employees succeed in their role. And I believe that when companies take these steps proactively, they're creating a sense of inclusion and belonging in the workplace, because employees don't have to ask for the interventions. I keep coming back to that because that's how you build a culture of inclusivity. It shouldn't be something that an employee needs to ask for or needs to label themselves for, right? It should be something that we include in the way that we do business.
I cannot agree with you more. It is, for all the reasons that you mentioned, it is very hard to come out and say that your brain works differently than someone else's, because of all the stigma we have around mental health and cognitive functions and everything like that in the world. I have a friend who is a principal and president of a school who was diagnosed last year with not just ADHD, but autism. And she was terrified to tell her school that she works for because she was afraid that they would treat her differently. She clearly is a high functioning person who has made it very far in life, but the fact that she was afraid that she'd be docked in a environment that's supposed to be inclusive. I mean, like schools are like supposed to be the most inclusive. So I think we have a very long way to go as a society, let alone. But I really applaud what is happening at Limbach and really hope that the rest of the industry takes notice and does the same as well.
Jen, can I add a little onto that? That I agree. I think what Limbach is doing, all of those strategies, anyone would be like lucky to work for your organization, and also working and partnering with provider agencies to be able to recruit talent. Those are really strong partnerships that will support any organization. But the point I really wanted to make was thinking about that we often want the person with a disability to change, where in reality, society and the workplace needs to change. And I think, Rebecca, that's what you were talking about, universal design, where one strategy or support supports others who might not want to say they need it. And I think we need to start thinking differently as a society, kind of what you said, Jen. It's about making the society more inclusive and more accessible to all versus wanting to change that person and have that person adapt to what we think is quote unquote normal. That is a very big difference. And I think, Rebecca, your organization is living and breathing that. And it's always so refreshing to hear that.
Did you have anything else you wanted to add about your recruitment practices that you're employing?
I do, because really I think Stacey and Jen highlighted recruitment, and it really for two reasons. One is I think recruiters play such a huge role because they're the first impression that somebody gets when looking at a business, and they also really help to set the tone for how the candidate thinks they're going to be treated throughout the process of interviewing. So I think a couple of things I'd highlight when it comes to best practices for recruitment. We have an incredible talent acquisition team that focuses, again, on hiring the right people for the role. So our interview process is a little bit different, I would say, than most other companies. We interview based on values and capability, not necessarily prior experience. Now, there is a requirement, right? You have minimum requirements for a job. However, we are also talking about what values you bring to the organization, kind of your innovation, the differences that your experiences will allow us to use, and really collaborate with other team members. We also recognize that people who identify as neurodivergent need really specific instructions. So when we give information about our interview processes, we do so in a very clear and concise way. So our recruiters are on the phone, they're sending emails, they're sending text messages, because again, this is meeting the candidate where they are and making sure that they're absorbing the information in a way that resonates with them. Another thing that we do is we are super transparent about the benefits that we offer, literally from the initial phone screen. We want people to know that we have things like a generous PTO policy, EAP, our sick time, our flexible work schedule, our summer hours, and our accommodation process and how to go about accessing those resources. And we don't do this just because it creates a good experience for the candidate. We do this, again, so that they don't feel like they have to disclose anything about themselves, and let them know about the culture that we have, where they're free to show up as their total authentic self. And the other thing is we offer different interview methods. So we offer virtual, we offer in-person, if you'd prefer to do the interview by phone. And we also limit the number of people that sit in an interview, because that could also be really overwhelming for folks who identify as part of the neurodivergent population. And I think implementing these things really lends itself to supporting diverse populations.
Wonderful. Absolutely. You guys are definitely leading the way, and that's super awesome to hear and see. So I'm going to open these next couple questions up to the panel. And in fact, I might just pick 2 or 3 and see if we have any questions from our audience. So we've talked a lot about challenges, you know, just of employing, but what are some unique challenges that the construction industry faces? We already talked about, you know, not being able to work from home when you're on a project site, a little bit hinted at that. But what are some other ways that we might struggle as an industry supporting neurodiverse employees compared to others? Anybody wants to take that?
I'm happy to jump in. So I think what I will say though is one of the great things about Limba is we try not to look at things as challenges, but rather as opportunities. So opportunities to be better trade partners, employers, and industry leaders. And one of the opportunities that I think exists specific to the construction industry is something we really haven't touched on, and it's the blended workforce, right? So at Limba and other construction companies and mechanical contractors, and building solution firms in the area, we have both a union and a non-union workforce. And our union team members' responsibilities, expectations, trainings, those are really governed and outlined through their local union and their collective bargaining agreements. So there's not a lot of training or control, if, for lack of a better word, that an employer has. But because the union workforce is such an integral part of our company and our teams, we see this as an opportunity to build relationships with our trade unions so that our union employees and non-union employees have the same experiences within the workplace, because as an employer, that is what we're responsible for: the work environment, the workplace, and where they report to on a daily basis. So I think some of the ways we do that and some of the challenges that we have to overcome is we have to figure out a way to grow and develop our field talent by really including them in the training opportunities we have, whether that's skilled training or like human skills training. Another thing is including our field leaders. So whether that's our superintendents, foremen, trade managers, in the management training that companies offer. So not only does this strengthen our relationship with the local, but it highlights our commitment to continued partnership with our trade allies, continued employment with our trade allies, and it really helps them to learn more about their own leadership skills, how to mentor and develop people, which ultimately translates back into the field so that they are in situations where they notice somebody needs a little bit more help learning something, or they're struggling with a test or through their apprenticeship. They can be able to identify things like that. And I think the last thing is partnering with the local trade managers to support any people issues or conversations about accommodations that may arise. Essentially ways to make people feel psychologically, physically safe, and really just have the interventions they need to do their job. And that really goes down to breaking the stigma of it's okay to ask for help if you need it.
And just to add on to what you're saying, Rebecca, when we think about stigma, I think we can also add in our unconscious biases when we are thinking about individuals with disabilities. And that is a preconceived notion that starts way from our early days of being in grade school. And when we think about individuals with disabilities and where they were located in the school or the bus that they took to school, and depending on a person and how severe or how whether it's how severe their disability is or the invisible disability, we make a judgment based on that. And that's where that you talked about that interview process, that first impression, but that will carry on. If someone has a more severe disability, we might not think they have the competence to do a skill, but when we really get to know them or allow that person to do the skill, they're able to do it. And when you think about the construction industry, you have coming all the way up to, you know, engineers to frontline workers who are out in the field. And we might be concerned about safety when it comes to those positions. But with the right supports in place, the right accommodations, the right training to the job coach, it's also bringing in that job coach and allowing for that person to receive training and onboarding. Everyone who has an interest and has the skills can be successful. It's oftentimes we hear it's a lot more work. I'm not sure how many times you guys have heard that. It's more work to do this. It's not more work when you have a long-term employee who's good at their job. You put in the efforts in the beginning, like any other employee, hope to retain that employee, and then you have somebody who is well-skilled and brings great talent to your organization. So long story short, don't judge a person based on what you see or who you see or how severe their disability might be. Focus on the skills and the value and talent they can bring to your organization with the supports and resources that come with that person.
Love that. All right, so I'm going to give our last question before we open it up, and this is for all of you. So how can different departments, HR, management, on-site teams collaborate effectively to support neurodivergent employees?
I can start with this one. I get to work with a lot of HR departments across several industry sectors, across whether it's within our state, whether it's outside of the state. And one of the things that I absolutely love is when HR partners have talked with the managers, talked with the employee, and they're trying to figure out where the support can be provided. And I think that it's key to not assume that the employee or the person that's having the challenges is the only person that is, at that moment in time, quote unquote, the problem, or that they're not capable of doing the job. It's really important to talk with the department, to learn about what the department is doing, what are the strategies being put in place, and be able to then come up with a solution that's going to be successful for the manager and the employee, because that in some ways has to be able to be a good working relationship. So it's important to look as holistic as an organization and be able to look at, is this someone that needs additional supports and accommodation that needs to be in place? And can we do that, versus seeing it as, this isn't going to be a good fit and this job isn't going to work. Rebecca, you used the word opportunities. What are the opportunities so that this employee can be successful at work, not just moving them through the process because it's not working?
Wonderful.
Yeah, I
Jeremy?
would just add one more thing, because I work very multidisciplinary role. Like, I communicate with many different companies as well as with like a lot of departments internally. And one thing that I've really noticed that was good for me when managers did this for me, and what I've kind of started doing with my team, is it's just like, be really clear on the methods of communication, that you're all kind of, what's the standard? Because it's like, then everybody kind of feels like they know what to do. And so, and if they don't, then you can kind of pick up on that and kind of then have those conversations and say, like, what is a better way for us to communicate? Being really open, like I'm like, this is the first time I've been a hybrid leader to a hybrid team. And we've had some really good conversations about, how do we want to communicate on Teams? What if we can't respond right away? Just even those type of things, because I've felt often personally, even like when you see a message on like read and unanswered, right? You can feel like you're being ignored, when that's really 99% of the time that is not the case. Somebody is putting a major fire out, right? But it's like talking through that so everybody kind of knows when, and then they can feel like they want to, like, okay, there's something else that came up that maybe was uncomfortable. How can they express that? And sometimes for me, it's like, we have a weekly team meeting, and that's where we can bring things up, right? And then I might, open door policy and things like that. But I think that is one of the biggest things, is just being clear on how you want to communicate with different departments and with your employees is huge.
So I definitely agree with the both of you. I mean, no one person or department can really create an inclusive culture. I think it happens collaboratively, and it also happens cross-functionally. But I think what I would kind of want to amplify is, it starts from the top, right? It starts from leaders who are transparent, accountable, open to feedback, willing to change, folks who really lead their business in a manner that welcomes and supports new ideas and participates in DEIB initiatives. We have several ERGs in this business, and they all have an executive sponsor from our senior leadership team. So it's more than just setting an expectation about like what's right and wrong, but it's really about leading by example and leveraging like the expertise that exists in the business. And ultimately, listen, I think what it comes down to is there isn't a secret recipe or like one thing that a company can do to create a workplace that's inclusive of folks who are neurodiverse or just diverse in general. It's about modeling that behavior top down. And listen, we win and lose by our teams, right? So as you've heard by my examples, at least here at Limba, we don't embrace neurodiversity because like we have to or because the law tells us. We do it because we care. Like that is the value that we lead by, and it's who we are as an organization, and it's just how we do business.
I love that. Looks like we might have time for one question if anyone in the audience has any. Feel free to raise your hand or come off mute. Doesn't look like we have any. All right, so let me share my last slide with how you can contact. First, I wanted to thank the three of you so much for giving us your lunch hour to talk about this super important topic. If anybody's looking for ways to reach out to MCCI or any of the panelists on here, if you can reach out to me, either through our website, my email address. I'm active on LinkedIn. We have an Instagram, a Facebook. I think we still have an X. I'm not sure. Or formerly known as Twitter. But absolutely reach out to me on any of these platforms, and I will connect you with Jen, Stacy, or Rebecca. Thank you very much and enjoy your day.
Thank you for moderating, Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.